Hi, Wayne from Talk Cars here. Let's talk about air intakes. The air intake is quite an important part of the engine. All of the air that the engine needs in the combustion process comes through the intake, and in there it's filtered. You don't want all the tiny particles of debris, metals, bits of sand and grit going into the engine. It causes a lot of abrasion, upsets the whole burn process, and eventually causes lots of problems. So you want to have filtered air coming into the engine to maximize the performance of your car. Now, the idea of having a filter over our mouths is something we've got used to with COVID restrictions and being forced to wear face masks. And we appreciate that it makes breathing more difficult. If we were into running or something, the last thing you'd want is something over your face restricting the air coming in. And that's the theory that's applied to cars and why people fit induction kits. But are they worth it? When should you fit an induction kit? And what problems can you encounter when you start putting induction kits on your car engine? So first of all, let's think about what the manufacturers have done with the air intake. The typical pipe going into the engine is about that size, and the paper filters that they use are quite large in comparison. So by having a large surface area of the filter, you've reduced the restriction. If you were only filtering that part of the pipe coming in, that would make for quite a restriction, and manufacturers use a paper medium that is concertina folded to present a massive surface area to the air coming in. So they've thought a lot about not restricting the air coming into the engine. If you've heavily tuned your car, you will find that the standard paper filter and airbox design is inadequate. The car is struggling to pull the air in. And if that's the case, then we do need to look at upgrades. So there's a couple of options. This is a performance panel filter. It's somewhat lower profile than the paper one. It's not as good at filtering. That's always the drawback. If you want better performance, you've always ended up with a reduction in the filtration. So we'd recommend that you go with a cotton gauze medium, and a lot of them come impregnated with a fine oil. Now, some people have attributed the fine oil with problems on the airflow sensor fouling up. So you need to be careful. If you're oiling it yourself, you certainly don't want to over oil it. The idea is just to have a slight oil residue on the filter so that all of those little particles will stick to it and not get into the engine. The main reason people add induction kits where you see the cone shaped filters added onto the intake and the airbox removed completely is because of the noise. They are just a cosmetic mod as far as we're concerned for most cars and most applications. They make the engine sound really nice, but they don't really give you more power. You've got a placebo effect because the car's making a lot more noise, especially when you press the accelerator. So that gives you the overall impression that you're getting more power. But if you put the car on the dyno and that's all you've done, added an induction kit, you in most cases will not make any more power. We've actually seen some engines lose a little bit of low down power with an induction kit added. So a big problem that you have with cone filters is they suck in a lot of warm air from the engine bay. We have seen some tests run which imply that if the car is moving, there's a lot more cold air going into the engine, so that's negligible. But the car does have to be moving quite quickly for that to happen. Otherwise you do have hotter temperatures under the bonnet and you are sucking in hot air. And as we all know from our physics lessons, warm air carries less oxygen, and you need to match your oxygen to your fuel in order to get an effective burn. So if the oxygen is reduced, the car has to slacken off on the fuel and you lose a little bit of power. So we need to be very careful when setting up an induction kit. So we'd certainly recommend that you put a cold air feed on to suck cold air in from the outside of the car. We'd only fit an induction kit if the car was restricted. So you've added so much extra power, the current factory design of airbox is not supplying enough air. Now typically you'd end up with a flat spot, particularly at the upper part of the RPM range. As soon as you hit that, the car's just not getting enough oxygen, so it has to back off the fuel. So you'll notice a little dip in the power or a blip. And in some cases we've seen engine lights come on and cars go into limp home mode because they struggle to match up the fuel and the air. So are performance air filters actually worth fitting to your car? Well, if you've done a lot of tuning, then yes, but we're talking about significant power gains. The factory designed airboxes generally flow quite well. We've seen a few manufacturers use the same size airbox across the model range, so in the more powerful models you're closer to that threshold of hitting a restriction than you would be on the smaller engines models, but you just need to be aware of that. So we don't actually recommend you go out and fit induction kits. The panel air filters that flow better actually work quite well. So if you're hitting a restriction and you don't want the cosmetic induction raw noise, then a performance air filter is a great drop-in option. It's also usually washable, so they last a lot longer than the paper ones. They cost a lot more to start with. So over time, if you're washing it and cleaning it, you'll recoup your money because you're not throwing it away and replacing it each time. And please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps us to get out there. See you in the next video.